You actually constructed walkthroughs and hint books without getting paid.
There was a satisfaction in which, like, I get from, like, when one of my classmates came back and were like, oh, I thank you for the notebook. I wouldn't have been able to finish the game without it, or something of the sort. It gave me a lot of satisfaction.
You can say it like it is. It made you popular, right? Today, we're going to talk about Resident Evil, the game that really defined the survival horror genre. It's also a game that our guest used to draw maps and write walkthroughs from to hand out to his good friends in school.
Ouch!
You're wounded. What kind of demon attacked you?
So, without further ado, welcome to PCGN. Fawzi Mesmar, head of design at EA DICE in Stockholm.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So you're head of design at DICE. What does that mean?
Indeed.
What is your working days filled with?
They're filled with meetings like everybody else's, I guess. So I'll tell you a bit about my job. So I'm part of the studio leadership team at DICE, where I look after all the designers that work in the studio. That includes creative directors, game designers, UX designers, level designers, anybody with design in their title. Basically, they report into me. And I'll be in charge of the design outlook of the Battlefield and the Battlefront franchises that we have in the company. So the creative outlook of the company is partially within my responsibility, as well as the well-being of everybody within the studio as part of the leadership team.
So whenever there's a game with battle in it, they call you. You're the guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. We're going to talk a lot about game design in this episode. And even though game design sounds like it's very clear what it is, it might not be. Let's see. So you have a very long gaming career. It's 18 years, you said to me before.
18 years in the business.
And before you came to DICE, which was about a year and a half ago, where have you been? You've been all over the world, right?
I have been, yes. I'm very fortunate. My career has taken me all over the world. So before living in Sweden, I lived in Germany, I lived in Japan, I lived in New Zealand, I did some work in Thailand. I'm originally from the Middle East. I'm from Jordan originally, where I started as indie development. And I worked for companies, like EA, DICE. I worked for King, I worked for Gameloft, I worked for Atlus, where I worked on the Persona franchise. I've been a game designer throughout my entire career, so that's my focus.
And also, and this is interesting, you mentioned you were originally born in Jordan, Amman. You've also written a book on game design in Arabic. What's behind that project?
So 3 years ago, I released my first book. It's called الخلاب في فن تصميم الألعاب, which translates to Al-Khallab in the art of game design. It was the first book ever to be written about the topic of game design in Arabic. And I wanted to do that because me starting out, I have to figure a lot of stuff out myself and make a lot of mistakes. And I was fortunate enough to have, gotten good education. My mom was an English teacher. I could speak English, and I can, get my hands on resources that were not available for a typical Arab kid to learn how to make games. So I basically wanted people who wanted to get access to, game design one-on-one stuff. To be able to access that without having to learn a new language or anything of the sort, so that they'll be available in their native language.
That's an excellent idea. How was it received?
It was really humbling, to be honest. So hundreds of people ended up, and now in thousands over the years, have ended up getting their hands on the book. I tried to make it as cheap as possible for people to get a hold of. Almost every other week I get a picture of somebody with a copy of my book or something of the sort. Really warms my heart. It feels like all the work is worth it. Yeah.
Today we're going to talk about the origin, the reason for all this, the reason for Fawzi's great career, namely the game Resident Evil. How would you describe Resident Evil 1, the first episode, for somebody who's never played it or heard about it?
It's a game in which you end up in a mansion that was running some kind of experiments where zombies are running amok, and you need to somehow survive and get the hell out of there while trying to undiscover um, what the hell happened there in the mean work.
I think it's really hard when playing Resident Evil games to get that there's a story behind it, because you're so afraid, and there's like it's darkness and you're shooting zombies anywhere. But there is a story. You can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Resident Evil is a survival horror game by Capcom from 1996. Resident Evil is Capcom's best-selling video game franchise ever, with over 100 million units sold worldwide. Today, Resident Evil is mainly remembered for defining the survival horror genre. If we travel back to 1996, this was the time when 3D games were getting popular for real. I mean, we had, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had Tomb Raider, we had, I think the Elder Scrolls came out with like the second episode, Daggerfall. There were a lot of games that were into 3D. And the problem with those games today, I think, is that they are really hard to play because the 3D is very archaic. Unless you have a remake, it's almost impossible to play because it's so blocky and ugly even.
There's a charm to it that I still like, actually.
Yeah.
It's nostalgia goggles. When you put the nostalgia goggles on, everything looks great.
Right. So Resident Evil, you said it's a mansion with zombies, and narrative-wise, that can sound a little tedious, boring, and tired today. But that is actually because Resident Evil was one of the franchises that repopularized zombies, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, it was at the time, like, zombies were like, we've heard about them from the movies, like from the Evil Dead and like these kinds of like OG movies, and Joe Romero's movies were like one of the biggest inspiration of, as Shinji Mikami looked into creating this game. And it like really made zombies popular again, and like you started seeing them everywhere after like the huge success of the first game.
Yeah, and even the genre, survival horror, was, according to you, it started with Resident Evil and maybe some other games.
The term survival horror was coined for the first Resident Evil. There were games that were like on the hinge of that. So like Alone in the Dark came out before Resident Evil, and the controls of Alone in the Dark, I played that on PC. The tank controls of Alone in the Dark was actually one of the inspiration that made it into Resident Evil.
Really?
And as the creators looked into that, the pre-rendered background with the blocky 3D characters. Kind of tech was kind of inspired by Alone in the Dark and made their way to Resident Evil.
Alone in the Dark, made by Infogrames, no?
Infogrames, I think.
Yeah, back in 1992 or something, 91 possibly. It also came out. Yeah, it was. That's
in
even,
that range.
Yeah, that's even uglier 3D, if I may say so today. But it was a fixed camera. Seen in third person. That was the thing,
yes.
I believe.
Yeah,
I have read...
It's a very smart decision from a design and tech point of view, because, as you mentioned, the reason why the graphics were so blocky is because there's only so many polygons you can show on screen, right, at the same time. And if you want to make everything in like real-time 3D, then you won't be able to have that many things there. A lot of the models wouldn't be able to have a lot of textures on them. Like, you'd run into memory restrictions super quickly. So a workaround was that you get the pre-rendered backgrounds, which will look way nicer.
Yeah.
And you have 3D models that are navigating on that space. So you can get the models to look a bit nicer, and you can get a really good-looking background, but you don't get freedom movements of camera. One of the things that really breathtaking about Resident Evil is that it looked so real at the time.
Yeah.
And you were like super immersed in this game because it looked great.
So you, being a game designer today, how would you say Resident Evil has affected your career choice and your view on game design?
Resident Evil was a pivotal game for me growing up. So I always knew I wanted to make games, but I didn't know what game design meant until I played Resident Evil. So something I used to do, which is very nerdy, I have to admit, is that in the very early internet days, it is that I would play a game and then finish it. And once I'm done with the game, I would write by hand on my school notebooks a walkthrough of the game. So I would go through the store, do this thing, and I would draw maps of the locations, and you'll find the key here and something of the sort. So I would do that, write the entire game's walkthrough by a pen on a notebook, and then give it to the other kids in class to help them finish the game. And after I finished the first Resident Evil multiple times, I was so into it that I started writing the walkthrough for it as well. And as I'm writing the walkthrough, I was tracing what the mansion is like. So I would move my character a bit, here's a room here, there's a room there, there's a key here. And then I was I stopped and thought, I was I'm just tracing what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Somebody must have came up with this out of nowhere and then made it into this game. And that's when I had the eureka moment of oh my God, that's what game design is.
Yeah.
And I want to be that's the coolest job in the world. I need to be a game designer.
So back in 1996, did you already like horror games or horror in general? Was that a thing?
No, I wasn't a particular horror fan, really. I wouldn't seek it, for example, and watching it on my VHS tapes or anything like that when we rented them.
Being scary, I mean, it's one of the toughest things I've heard. I wouldn't know, of course, is to be fun. It's hard to be fun, even also in games. Is it also hard to scare in games?
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I really respect Resident Evil for its design, because it utilized gameplay to scare you. So there are the moments that will scare you whether it's a game or not. A jump scare. If a dude jumped from behind the couch right now, you'll probably be scared. Or a zombie for that matter, that will probably scare you. So there's the thematic elements of a jump, a sudden surprise element, or gore are more likely to create sense of dread in someone, right? But you can utilize that and you can describe that in a book and scare someone, or you can create a scene in a movie and do that. What Resident Evil did is that it added gameplay scare to that to frighten you. So, for example, your progress is volatile. So if you die, you need to redo a bunch of things. In order for you to save your game, you need to have a particular item, like an ink ribbon, take it to a particular space, which is a safe room, and then write on the typewriter for you to save your progress. So even the action of saving to maintain progress is volatile, because on your way to get that item, to go to the typewriter, something could attack you.
Right.
And then you die and you lose that progress. So as you're going to literally save your progress, you are worried about what you're doing. And one of the things that they did gameplay-wise also in Resident Evil as a survival horror thing is that they gave you power. So you go here's a gun or a bazooka, which you can, finally I can top these monsters. And then you go here's a gun, here's a monster that takes 8 bullets to die, and here's 3 bullets. Yeah. So they give you a sense of power, but they also make you in fear of losing that sense of power at the same time. So as you're approaching the game, you are always outnumbered or overpowered. And whenever you have that inch of power with you, you are worried about losing it. So you're trying to preserve it just in case you need it.
And many games afterwards have been copying that, of course. And on top of my mind, I come to think of Dead Space, for example. Mm-hmm. It's the same situation, but in space, that whatever I do, whatever I have, will never be enough. So I have to think of other solutions. We talked about in the beginning of the narrative, and I said, is there really a narrative? And we haven't talked about the narrative at all. Yeah. So I'm still asking that question. There is a narrative. You are part of a special elite task force team, right?
Correct.
And
the stars.
Yes, stars, exactly. And you can either play Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine.
Jill Valentine, yes.
The only reason you change characters is because you want a different, appearance.
And that's one of the things I really liked about the narrative of the first Resident Evil. So, the stars are sent into this forest where, the random disappearances happen. There was a team that was sent before them, the Bravo team, that disappeared mysteriously. Yeah. Then they land in this area, and then they're looking for the Bravo team, and then all of a sudden they're surrounded by zombie dogs. And then the guy with the chopper runs away and leaves you there for dead. You and your teammates run into the mansion, and then the place you took for refuge is the source of all this, scary business. And then Chris and Jill, they're separated in that run. And depending on who you choose to start, how they meet and the other characters they meet is quite different. So there's differences in the stories based on the character that you start on choosing it. The series ended up building on that later on. And like in Resident Evil 2, for example, that the campaign changed almost quite drastically depending on the character you choose. But in Resident Evil, it was like, oh, if I'm with Chris, I need to go that way that I will not encounter in Jill, and the other way around. And I thought that was super cool.
Right. The source behind all these zombies is a corporation called Umbrella, right?
Umbrella Corporation.
Which
yes.
is a weird name. And also, it's outside a city called Raccoon City, which is that's a really weird American name for a town, I think. I mean, come on. What are we going to name this town? There are lots of raccoons here. Let's call it Raccoon City. No. I think they had some, I don't know, issues with the whole narrative thing that when they make later games, they have to kind of fleshing out the story a little to make it more interesting and also to make it into a movie franchise, which they did.
None of us could have anticipated how wild and crazy, turns the game took at some point. So like, there was always a tongue-in-cheek thing about the Resident Evil thing, in which like you want to take the story seriously, but not too seriously.
Yeah.
And they just cranked that up to 11 as the franchise went on.
I would like to follow up this interview with a few quick questions that tells us more about what you are as a gamer. For example, Fawzi, if you could choose to be a game character for a day, you don't have to pick from Resident Evil, but who would you choose to be?
A game character for a day?
Well, for an hour, I don't know. I mean, not for the rest of your life. I mean.
All right, I'll be. I'll probably be Ryu. I'd like to throw fireballs around.
Oh, from Street Fighter, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I could see if I could like do the hurricane kick, and I can actually use that as a method of transportation. So I could like use that to fly places. That would be cool.
Are you a violent man, Fawzi? You don't. I mean...
Not at all. Not at all. I'm quite the pacifist.
If you do that, I'd choose Blanca.
That's a useful skill. Like, you never know when you need to power a whole block, right?
Exactly. The first video game you remember playing, which was that, really?
That would be Space Invaders on the Atari 2600.
Really?
First game I ever played. My dad bought this Atari for my older sister. She played Space Invaders, kind of liked it, but she played an hour a day or so. I played 6. I got obsessed with the game.
And you're a skilled gamer, because somebody told me that you used to be a professional esport player.
Oh, professional is too much, but I used to compete. I used to compete in StarCraft and a bit of Street Fighter. So I played tournaments and stuff like that.
The last question, and this is maybe a stupid question to a man who's been doing so many things, but do you still have a dream project, a dream project that you would like to work on within the gaming industry?
If I would make a Zelda game, that would be the dream. Zelda is my all-time favorite franchise.
Fawzi, it's been great having you here. It's been great having hearing your wisdom from game design, from a game designer's perspective, and how it all started with Resident Evil.
Thank you very much. You humble me. Wisdom is an overstatement. More like ramblings.
And I'm going to check out your book. I won't be able to read it.
There's pictures in it. So there's also embarrassing photos of me from back in the day. So
you sold it right there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good luck with all your projects. Good luck with your dream project, Zelda. I hope that you will be able to do that someday.
Thank you for having me, man. It was awesome.
And take care. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Take it easy.
No! Richard!
Jill, be careful.
Did you enjoy this episode? Then please do not forget to subscribe for more PC Games nostalgia.